Hi guys, I wanted to show you guys today how to make a simple cheesecake and how to flavor it any kind of flavor you want and get it to look delicious and beautiful. I'm really excited about this one. So I just wanted to show you a simple graham cracker crust. You can feel free to use ginger snaps, all sorts of different types of things for this crust, but this is a nice illustration of just a really simple one. I've got graham crackers crushed up in this bowl with about an ounce of sugar. I've got a little bit of melted butter right here. I'm just going to mix this together until it looks like wet sand. That's kind of the texture we're going for. And then we're just going to pat it into our pan. And I'm going to give you some tips about how to get that nice and level and even. All right. Cheesecake is probably one of the most requested things that I get asked about as a pastry chef, like how do I make a good cheesecake? So I'm going to give you some really good tips and tricks to take any recipe you currently already have and make it that much better. All right, so this is looking like wet sand and smelling really good. Here's my little pan. This is an 8-inch cake pan, so that's what this recipe is going to fill up. If you have a springform pan, you might want to double this recipe. All right. So to help me get this flat, you can use a measuring cup. I'm going to use a ramekin, which is just going to be nice and help me get a really nice flat texture there. And we just want to push this down into the pan nice and evenly. That's why I'm using something flat. You can lightly grease your pan if you like. It's not necessary, but this is a recipe that can stick to the pan. That's why a lot of cheesecakes use springform pans. I don't like to have to buy a specialized pan for everything I make personally, so I just like to use my good old cake pan. That is looking pretty good. When you have some high and low spots, you can go back with your ramekin or measuring cup. I also have a creme brulee dish that's nice and flat, so I'm going to use this guy and see if that helps. Nothing has to be perfect. That's a great thing about food. All right. That's looking pretty perfect. Just give you guys a view of what that looks like. Just nice and pressed in and even. Just make sure there are no low spots because we don't want our cheesecake batter touching the bottom of the pan. So I've got my oven preheated to 325 degrees. I'm gonna bake this for about 5 minutes and then we're gonna let that cool a bit. And while it's cooling, we're gonna come back and mix the cheesecake batter. So I'll see you in a second. All right guys, so that crust has been in the oven for 5 minutes. It's out and the whole kitchen smells amazing. So I'm ready to mix this cheesecake batter. So a couple really pro tips that are gonna help out. Everything for your cheesecake needs to be at room temperature. That doesn't mean I pulled it out of the fridge an hour ago. It means overnight sitting out at room temperature, depending how hot or cold your kitchen is. This is one of those big things in baking and pastry is we really have to control the temperature of our ingredients to get them to do the things we want them to do. Cream cheese just loves to get lumpy. You've probably had this experience if you made cheesecake before where you get little lumps of cream cheese. One tip is, I've got the cream cheese in my mixer right now. I'm just gonna start to cream it a little bit in there and whip a little air in there before I even do anything else. And then the next thing I'm gonna do, I've got some sugar and a tiny bit of bread flour, which is a higher protein flour in here. I'm actually gonna sift these again into my cream cheese. We're gonna stop and scrape a lot for this recipe, so just be prepared. I'd rather you over scrape than under. I've got this little guy, little sifter, he's super helpful. I really wanna prevent any lumps from forming any way I can. It's very hard to save a cheesecake once it's lumpy. All right, so that's looking great. So like I said, at many points we're gonna stop and scrape. There's a couple different ways you could do this and mix it, and so I'm gonna give you some tips for that as well. So I'm gonna let that cream cheese mix on the mixer with that bread flour and sugar for a little bit. So you can actually switch the next 2 steps. I like to add my sour cream next. And then I'm gonna add my eggs and vanilla. You could actually do the eggs next if you like to. I just prefer to do it this way. Either way is fine. And as I said, we're gonna really need to stop and scrape. The places that you're gonna see chunky cream cheese is gonna be like at the top of your whip here, or your paddle, I'm sorry. Excuse me. You're gonna also see up on the sides of the bowl. And then there's also a lot of times in KitchenAid mixers, there's a little kind of like nub here at the bottom of the bowl. Cream cheese loves to just stick right there in that little divot. You can see right here, see some stuff sticking in there. So make sure you like pull it right off the mixer and really get in there. All right, it's looking really good. I can see some kind of lumps of where there were those stuck pieces of cream cheese. So I'm gonna get that all out before I continue to mix. That's one of the reasons why I like adding the sour cream next, is it is kind of a similar consistency and product to cream cheese. So I know it's not gonna mess up stuff too much. So I add this. Maybe your recipe doesn't call for sour cream, that's totally fine. It really just depends on the recipe, but these tips will still help you regardless of the recipe you use. I really love these tiny spatulas. They're so helpful. Really highly recommend. They're really inexpensive, but like for getting things out of little bowls, so helpful. So I can actually see some granulated sugar sitting here on the paddle. So I'm gonna get that in and make sure it's all together. All right, we're just gonna really keep our eyes on this as it mixes. I can see some parts that aren't emulsified and aren't as lumpy. You're not gonna get a chance to get those lumps out once you mix those eggs in. So just make sure everything is really nice and creamy before we start to add our eggs. I'd rather you take more time and let more air whip in there than try to rush it and have a lumpy cheesecake. It's not very delicious. All right, I'm gonna stop and show you guys this because it really is coming together. You can see that batter has changed even just on the paddle. But look at how much lighter and creamier and smoother that looks. That's really what we're going for. If your kitchen is really cold, I recommend letting the cream cheese and sour cream and eggs sit out for 2 days. If it's really warm, maybe only a few hours. Like I said, once we add the eggs in there, we're not gonna get a chance to get those lumps out again. So just take your time, be patient, and really get all those weird little lumpies out. Oh, looks beautiful. Once this guy is ready to go, I'm gonna show you guys a little trick for adding your eggs. You don't have to keep your eggs whole like this with the yolks and the different egg proteins. If you just wanna take a whisk or a little fork and break them up a little bit, you can add your eggs a lot slower and help emulsify them into your batter a little better. So I'll show you how to do that. So I'm just gonna break apart these egg proteins just a little bit. I'm not trying to add air or anything. I'm really just trying to make them a little easier and more liquid. There you go. Our batter is looking quite lovely and very smooth, no lumps that I can see. So I'm gonna start adding my eggs slowly. Turn your mixer down to probably about the stir or maybe the number 2 when you start to add the eggs. You can always speed it up after you've added a bit, but we just really don't want to send any eggs flying across the kitchen. And add your eggs really, really slowly. Again, we're gonna wanna stop and scrape a lot to really make sure this batter is totally emulsified. All right, I'm gonna stop and scrape again and really get every little bit and piece off of there. This batter is looking beautiful. Just want to make sure that little nub, I can actually see there's some stuff that was stuck on the bottom there, so I just want to make sure I get all of that into the batter. See that? That was actually stuck on the bottom, that little chunky bit. Oh yeah, this batter is looking beautiful. So I do have another little tip for this recipe. It's not necessary, and I don't see it in a lot of cheesecakes, but in this recipe we add about a tablespoon of heavy cream just at the very end. It's optional, honestly, but that little bit of fat I think is quite lovely. All right, and this batter is just looking perfect. I hesitate to say perfect because perfection is hard to achieve. But you can really see a nice, creamy, smooth. I can see these little lumps on the paddle. I know I'm not going to be able to work out those lumps right now, so I'm not even going to worry about trying to get them in the batter because I really don't want them to stick. Don't be afraid to go in with your hands as well. A lot of people get kind of trepidatious about that, but don't worry about it. So I'm going to get my pan ready, and then I'm going to show you how to flavor this guy, and we're going to make a blackberry cheesecake today. Okay, so I've got my prepared pan ready to go. I've got a piping bag here that I'm going to use for only the flavored part of the batter. I've got some blackberries that I defrosted and then crushed up a little bit with the back of a spoon so we get some nice texture and some nice juice in there. I'm going to take this batter, and he's just going to get poured right into this pan, but I'm going to reserve about a cup to 3/4 of a cup of it. Ooh, beautiful. So I'm taking about that much visually, looks about right to me. And I'm gonna add my berries into this guy. I'm gonna pour it into this bowl. And this is gonna be our flavoring. Like I said, you can use any kind of berry, you could use chocolate ganache, you could do all sorts of stuff. Flavor it what makes you excited. So I'm just gonna emulsify this guy together, and it looks so beautiful. What I really love about this technique is how awesome the color difference looks and just how beautiful the cheesecake bakes up, and when you slice it, it's so pretty. So I think you're really gonna like this. So I'm gonna take my flavored cheesecake batter, I'm gonna put it in this piping bag. Just gonna pour this right in here. Ooh, it looks pretty already. Don't gonna waste too much of that. It is gonna be a different consistency than the rest of the batter, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna cut a little small bit off of here, and then I'm going to inject my cheesecake with this flavored batter. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just be a little careful as you do it because it might dribble. So I'm gonna go down in there and I'm gonna squirt one. Got some whole berries in there. 2. About 5 seems about right here. You do a little more, maybe a little squirt in here, over here. All right, so I'm taking my offset spatula into my cheesecake with some flavored batter injected in there. And we're not gonna swirl too much because too much means we just get all one color. I'm gonna be careful, drag through those colored portions. Now I'm gonna go back the other way. Oh, and isn't that just beautiful? Like already I want to eat that. I love it. Now this guy is ready to go in the oven. It's going to go in at 325, the same temperature we bake the crust at, and it's going to be in there for at least an hour, probably more like an hour and 15 minutes. We're gonna bake this in a bain-marie, which is essentially just a water bath, a fancy French name for that. I'm gonna have cold water just out of the tap. I've got my 8x2 cake pan in a much larger cake pan, and I'm gonna fill up the water up to about 2/3 of the way up of our original smaller cake pan. And this is gonna ensure really nice, even cooking. So everything cooks at the same temperature. When you cook something in the oven, it always cooks from the outside in. Cooking something in a water bath is gonna prevent that outside in and make sure everything is even all the way through, which is what we want with cheesecake. So this is looking great. I'm gonna carefully take this into my oven. One technique I've learned from doing this a few times, have somebody open your oven door first for you, and then you can slide it in a lot easier. So we'll get a nice shot of that going in the oven, and then in about an hour, hour and 15 minutes, we're gonna get this ready to go, to cool, and then hopefully eat later today. Thank you. All right, guys, our cheesecake has cooled to room temp, and I put it in the fridge for a few hours just to cool down so we could more easily unmold this guy. It is looking gorgeous and beautiful. It started to pull away from the edges of the pan, which is what I'm looking for before I unmold it. This can be risky business, so don't worry, I understand. Right now, I've got warm water from the tap in a little pitcher, and I've got my knives sitting in there to keep them warm to help me with cutting. I'm just gonna take my little paring knife. I'm gonna slide this very carefully around the edge of the pan, pushing against it so I don't cut into the cheesecake. But I'm really trying to make sure that I'm releasing it from the edges of the pan so it'll come out a lot easier. Oh, it smells so yummy. All right. Now I've got a plate with some saran wrap. I'm gonna turn this over on this plate. Hopefully this saran wrap helps it not stick so much. And then I'm gonna put this cutting board underneath so we can cut the cheesecake. All right, that guy's been unmolded beautifully. So in order to cut this guy, I've got my hot knife in this hot water. I'm gonna wipe it off every time. I just wanna show you this technique. I'm gonna slice in here. You can see there's like schmutz on my knife, so I don't want that. So I'm gonna put it back in that hot water, wipe it off with my kitchen towel again, and then come back, slice in here. And that's gonna be a much more beautiful, clean edge of a slice of that blackberry cheesecake. Oh, that's lovely. I'm gonna finish slicing this cheesecake and then immediately start eating it because this smells so good.